Have you ever been afraid of being inside of your own house? What would you do if there was something outside that you couldn't explain? Last night started off pretty normal. Most of the downstairs lights were off when I got home. Nicole doesn't mean to do it, but she always seems to forget that I work the graveyard shift. It was nothing to be angry about, though. I simply planned to bust her chops for forgetting again the next morning. I hadn't eaten anything in the last few hours, so rather than going straight to bed like I always do, I decided to pop a frozen pizza in the microwave, just to silence my growling stomach. Once I opened the beeping microwave, I saw that its clock read 2:49 a.m. I almost regretted staying up this late to eat this pizza. I could feel my eyelids getting heavier and heavier as time passed. Rather than move to the table to eat, I ate right in front of the microwave. I just wanted to get some food in me and get some rest before I had to follow the same tiring schedule all over again the next day. From where I was eating, my front door was roughly 90 degrees to my left and about 15 feet away. I could see my front door and the small window beside it if I was looking that way, but at that point I wasn't focused on anything other than my pizza. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the motion lights had just unexpectedly turned out. Other than being surprised, I didn't pay much attention to it at that time. We live in a pretty wooded area and get animals moving around through our yard all the time. After a minute, the lights clicked back off. I assumed that whatever had triggered them must have been scared off by the lights. I returned to inhaling my pizza. Once I was done eating, I dragged myself to the stairs with what little energy I had left in my body. To get to the stairs, you have to walk into the front entryway and pass by the front windows. Without thinking, I took a look out of my front window and was immediately jolted awake as my heart pounded like it was going to leap out of my chest. Standing in my yard about 20 feet away from my front door was a man. Well, the outline of what seemed to be a man. There are no streetlights on our street, so the only lights in our yard were the motion lights we installed when we move in, and the dim light we keep in our entryway, radiating out the front windows to the yard. All I could see was this outline, with his head craned upwards, as if he was looking at the stars or something. I didn't really know what to do. It was a freaky sight to see, but we live in a small and secluded community. We know everyone who lives around us, and our neighbors are all very trustworthy people. I figured this person was someone I knew, so I tapped on the window to get the person's attention. I didn't want to wake Nicole, so I tried to stay as quiet as possible. He didn't budge. No reaction at all. I figured that whoever was out there could hear me, so I opened the door. I was scared beyond belief. But at the end of the day, I try to see the best in people. The figure in my yard hadn't really done anything for me to call the police. I just wanted to resolve this and go to bed. As the door creaked open, I realized the figure had changed slightly. He was now staring right at me. It was jarring. 2 seconds prior, when looking out the window, he was just staring upwards. I couldn't make out the finer points of his features yet, as the light from the house barely reached him, and I thought that made him look even more creepy. The figure just started to walk backwards towards the road, while still facing me. As the person sped up slightly, the motion lights finally came back on. He wasn't anyone I'd seen before. He was pretty tall, maybe 6'4", and so skinny he looked like a skeleton. He truly looked like he had never eaten anything a day in his life, and he was completely hairless. No eyebrows, no facial hair, and bald. I was speechless as this seemingly mute and sickly person just silently observed me, and I quickly realized that he was less terrifying when he was obscured by the shadows. He turned and ran away from me through my yard, across the road, and into the woods on the other side of the road. I was frozen in fear. Neither fight nor flight kicked in for me. Had this person wanted to hurt me or Nicole, he had his chance, but he didn't take it. I locked the door and went upstairs, not really sure of what to do. I couldn't really have called the police once he was gone, could I? I mean, this guy didn't really do anything. Sure, he was on private property, but I'm sure the police wouldn't take it seriously. I figured it was useless, and that I'd rather keep my guard up just in case this man came back tonight, and I'll worry about calling the police later. I got very little sleep. I was sure that every rustle of the leaves or every gust of wind was the trespasser returning. I finally shut my eyes at 6 a.m. when the sun started to rise, but was up when I heard Nicole shuffling to the shower around 8.
Didn't expect you to be up. Aren't you sleepy?
Yeah, but I couldn't really sleep. Tough night of work and all that. Since I'm up, why don't you make me some breakfast before you go to work? She smiled and nodded in appreciation. I wanted to tell her about the events from a few hours prior, but I knew it would freak her out. I thought maybe her favorite dish of bacon and eggs would make the news easier for her. Really dumb logic in hindsight, but I guess I was still experiencing fear-induced shock.
What are we gonna do?
Nicole was trying to be calm, but I knew that she was freaked out. I told her there wasn't much for us to do right now. We argued a little bit, and she made it clear that she really wanted to call the police. I still didn't think it was a good idea. We had zero evidence to prove that anyone was there in our yard the previous night. Or so I thought.
What about those cameras that Mrs. Case installed? Didn't you link them up to your laptop when we moved in or something?
We moved in 5 years ago because this house was a lot closer to both of our jobs. It was kind of out in the middle of nowhere, but we liked the privacy the community offered. We bought the house from Kobe Case, whose mother was an old widower, living alone for a few years. She had been petrified of the neighborhood ever since the death of her husband. Her son sold the house on her behalf so that she could live with him, hopefully living out the final years of her life in peace, and Kobe with their wife and kids. Before she moved out, she had Kobe install a few cameras outside her house, just to provide her a peace of mind. The thing were cheap pieces of junk, and Kobe himself said they rarely looked at them. But it turns out they actually came in handy. I shrugged. I guess you're the brains in the relationship after all, Nicole. I'll call the boys in blue and deal with them and the cameras before I head off for work. In the meantime, do me a favor and don't get too upset about all this. That was easier said than done, but I actually think she was a lot calmer once I actually started to take her police suggestions seriously. I kissed her goodbye and went out to work things out. I poured myself a coffee and got to work. I was half expecting the cameras to work, given their age. I opened the software and after 15-ish minutes of updates, finally saw a live feed of 4 different cameras outside. The camera in the driveway was angled poorly to the point where you could only see a small sliver of the driveway and dense foliage, while the back and side cameras showed mostly foliage and the fenced portion of our yard. Kobe had done a crappy job setting up most of the cameras, but the front camera was set up perfectly. The front camera was angled perfectly to have captured our uninvited visitor. I went into the database and found last night's camera feeds. Sure enough, at 2:54 a.m., the man crept out from the shadows and into our front yard. There it was. Concrete, undeniable proof. I called the police and they took me very seriously once I told them I had video evidence of the intruder. The operator said that 2 officers would be sent to my home to view last night's video and to file a police report. But my relief was short-lived. Something the operator said made the hairs stand up on the back of my neck.
Has this individual showed up on any of the cameras on any other night?
All at once, I realized how terrifying this possibility was. I mean, how many times did I lay awake in bed and see the front lights click at odd hours of the night? Like I said, it was a pretty regular occurrence for us. I immediately checked the feed from the night before I encountered the man face to face. I wasn't sure when he might come, so I started at 9 p.m. I played it at 2x speed and made it through the night without anything of note. Momentary relief. I went back one more night. At 12:36 a.m., he creeps into the yard and triggers the front motion lights. But it got even worse. He stayed there, motionless, in complete darkness until just about 5 a.m. He was so still for almost 5 hours that he didn't even trigger the motion lights again until he turned around and left for the day. Think about that. While our motion lights aren't very sensitive, I know for a fact that something as simple as a head jerk from a sneeze would set them off. This guy was essentially a statue for almost 5 hours. The police arrived and I told the 2 officers about this new development, and they were uncomfortable. Sergeant James, the veteran between the 2 officers, would later tell me that he never saw anything like this in the 23 years he'd been on the job. We went through 33 days worth of video logs and found that the man came to my home on 27 of those nights. Besides the night I interrupted him, his briefest stay lasted 22 minutes and 15 seconds, 5 days ago. His longest stay occurred early last week. He arrived at 11:57 p.m. and left at 6:13 a.m. He always stands in a similar spot in our front yard, about 20 feet from the door. I called in sick for work tonight because I can't begin to describe how little I want Nicole to be alone at this house when night falls. I'm terrified. So are the cops, especially since they don't have this person for much. So far, all the evidence shows is trespassing and loitering on private property. If they were to catch him in the act and not find anything to charge him with, he'd probably just get a fine or brief stint in jail. They claim they'll have patrol cars scouring the area tonight, and 1 car stationed in front of my house all night, which makes me feel somewhat better. But their lack of answers and their obvious uneasiness about all this makes me extremely nervous. Nicole comes home in an hour, and it will be dark soon. If anyone here knows anything about the situation, or just has a theory, or spots a detail that I miss, please let me know in the comments. I will update you all when or if we learn more about this situation, or if something of note occurs. Until then, let's just hope we make it through the night tonight.